Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features Daredevil number 191, cover dated February 1983. And this is the final issue of Frank Miller's original run on Daredevil, going all the way back to 158 when he came on board as a penciler and then took over the authoring duties as well with issue 168. So it has been a roughly 4-year journey for Frank Miller on this particular title, and he's really grown as both an artist and a writer. But we haven't had full pencils from him for the last number of issues, where he was only providing layouts for Klaus Janson. So in this particular issue, we're getting full pencils from Miller and not Janson on inks, but rather Terry Austin. But the cover is entirely by Frank Miller, and it really is in the style that he was developing for his move to DC Comics and his creator-owned Ronin. So all of the hatching and cross-hatching here for this image, really striking image of Daredevil atop one of the rooftops of Midtown Manhattan, and the caption, "How does a man search for his soul?" Very, very evocative of that new style, in particular the inking that he's developing. And yeah, it's really effective, but you can also see seeds of where he would go with his own art into a more cartoony, grotesque aspect of his art. And you can see with the cartoony trajectory here, even in this image, the bigness of Matt Murdock's hands as Daredevil here, holding the billy club there, for example. But I really like the evocation of what seems to be a misty, foggy night in Midtown Manhattan, which evokes, or maybe better to say connotes, the fogginess of Matt Murdock trying to find his own soul, his moral core and conscience. So let's open this one up to the first page. It is an incredibly attention-grabbing opening, very unexpected. We have the image of a handgun we get in the first-person narration, which is Daredevil's, that it's a .38 caliber revolver manufactured in Hartford, Connecticut. It's one of the most popular handguns in America. It is not a target pistol, nor is it useful for hunting animals, large or small, as its accuracy cannot be guaranteed for long-distance shooting. No, there's only one thing this weapon is good for, only one reason it's bought, stolen, or smuggled onto the island of Manhattan: it kills people. Wow, what an arresting opening. Interesting technique here too, where we have what could have been a single panel of Daredevil holding and touching the handgun divided into 4. It gives us a sense of the passage of time, and then we have this really striking anchor image in the middle of the page of Daredevil holding that .38 caliber revolver right to the temple of his own head. And yeah, it really hooks the reader's attention. What is going on here? We have the title of the story, Roulette, so that clues us in that he's gone crazy maybe and is about to blow his brains out as part of a psychopathic game. And we have our creative team, Frank Miller, writer, penciler. So he's here, his very last issue of the run, back to full pencils, and it's welcome to see him return with full pencils. And then the surprising embellisher, Terry Austin, on the inks. And then another surprise, Lynn Varley, who would go on to be a very important collaborator of Miller's in the 1980s and 1990s, in particular on works like Ronin, Dark Knight Returns, of course, and also Elektra Lives Again. And she would become his wife, and then they had an acrimonious divorce, and so they're no longer at all, what would I say? They have no amicable relationship at the moment, and that's a real pity because they were a tremendous creative force in the 80s and 90s working together. And then we have the 4 panels at the bottom of the page. Daredevil's finger on the trigger, the hammer moving back, his squeezing the trigger, the hammer about to hit whatever you would call this part of the gun that would set off the bullet. What is going to happen? We turn the page, click. There is no bullet in the chamber, and he survived that particular moment or opening of the Russian roulette game as it will turn out. And we see here on the 2 pages that we have a mirroring of the first panel here, where Daredevil has the gun pressed to the side of his head, and then he points it directly at Bullseye. So here he is in a hospital room. This is the last that we saw Bullseye at the end of Daredevil 181. He is completely paralyzed. Matt let him drop from a great height. He didn't save him, and so Bullseye hit the ground, broke his back, and is completely paralyzed. And Daredevil in the first person narration says, "You must be wondering why I came here, Bullseye. Why Daredevil, man without fear, idol of millions," he's being ironic, "wastes a lovely autumn evening in the company of his deadliest enemy. The answer's simple enough. I'm here to play a game with you. It's called roulette, but not the kind you play in a casino." And so he explains the game of Russian roulette. "You feel lucky, Bullseye? It's your turn. Click. No bullet. Hope you don't mind me for doing the honors for you like that, Bullseye. It's just that I don't want you to miss out on all the fun. And you, well, why be polite? You're paralyzed, can't move a muscle in your whole body, can't even talk. But that's too bad. Yeah, too bad I did it for you." Again, like I said at the end of issue 181. "Of course, in a way, you did worse to me. Yes, much worse. You murdered Elektra in that very issue, the woman I loved. Maybe that's why I want to play this game, but I don't think so. And this is what's intriguing. No, you killed Elektra months ago, and while that's made me do some crazy things, it's not what brought me here, not directly. It's Chucky, he brought me here, let me explain." So this is our prologue, our alarming prologue to an upcoming story. And just great work on these pages, minimalist, barely any background at all except for the suggestion of these windows with the Venetian blinds and then the light cast across the floor of Bullseye's hospital room, including the shadow there of the Venetian blinds across the bottom of his bed. Really, really great work. Really great stuff. You can see that despite his paralysis, he's able to lift that eyebrow in fear at the crazy thing that Daredevil has done. And again, we see here in this particular panel, that could be one full panel, that upshot on Daredevil's face, but instead Miller breaks it into 4 and it gives us that suggestion of the passage of time. Really like the rendering there in Terry Austin's inks on the underside of Daredevil's nose. That's really good stuff. So now we're going to get in to the story with Chucky, and that's going to reveal to us some of the theme of this particular issue of Miller's. So Miller would have gotten a lot of comment in letters sent into the Daredevil comic, but also in the trade magazines of the time concerning the violence of the comic under Miller's authorship. So Miller really pushed the limits on what would be publishable in Comics Code Authority approved comic in the time period, and there was criticism of that, and so he's reflecting on all of that in this final issue. What impact does violence in media, whether it's television, film, or in this case, metatextually comics, what impact does that have on children, if any? So he's reflecting on that via this story that is the final one of his run. And Miller himself has expressed that this is his favorite Daredevil story that he produced in the original run, which is intriguing. So he's proud of this one, put a lot of thought into it. So Matt recounts the story of his visit to Hank Jurgens, a case that Foggy Nelson, his partner, put him onto. And note the white picket fence there and the hanging flower basket in this kind of suburban home of Hank Jurgens. And his son there, Chucky, it turns out it's his only son, is watching a tape of a fight between Bullseye and Daredevil in a television studio. And this is not one of Frank Miller's stories. That's what's so interesting here. This is a reference to the very early fight between Bullseye and Daredevil in a TV studio in Daredevil issue 146. So prior to Miller coming on board, but he's calling back to that particular fight. Watching that video machine again, says the father to his son, the Daredevil tape, right, I swear, why couldn't I have a son who watches football with me like a normal boy? So the son apologizes. The father says it's dinner time and get his hands washed. And the son says, yes, Papa. Now, there's some issues here with the rendering of the child. So the child is maybe supposed to be 8 or 9 or 10 years old, but some of the line work here, like the bags under his eyes, make him look like an old man. And so he'll kind of switch throughout, like he looks like a young child here in profile in these shots, but here he looks like an old man. And my criticism for that lands with Terry Austin. Terry Austin as inker should be drawing a distinction between the kind of line work he can do on an adult character versus a child. You really want to go easy on the hatching and cross hatching on children in order to convey them as children precisely, and not as shrunken old men or women, which is what can happen and happens a few times in this particular issue. So Daredevil is listening to the father as he's explaining about the Bullseye fight with Daredevil in the TV studio, and Matt says, I heard about it. Yeah, that's right, says Hank. Guess you couldn't have seen it. Well, you ain't missing nothing, Murdoch. Turns off the TV, and now they're sitting down at dinner. And look again, the minimalist backgrounds, pretty much just the window, the light being cast, the shadows being cast by the table and chairs there. And this is a very awkward dinner with Matt Murdock. The wife basically says nothing. You can see her slumped shoulder there. The father seems to have cast a really baleful influence over his family. He's a real authoritarian. He's asking for the roles to be passed to him. The boy passes beats instead of roles, and the father makes a whole big deal of it in front of Murdoch, who says nothing. You got something to say, boy? Says the father. I'm sorry, Papa. And I love the way that Miller basically shows in the decreasing size of the profile of Chucky's head how small he's made to feel. It's really, really effective use of the panels, the sequencing of panels here in this particular tier of panels on this page. And then we get a shot of everybody at the dinner table. Like I said, everybody's mostly in shadow, and it really gives a sense of how dour this dinner is. The father's explaining about this court case. Judder's just a jealous bum is all. I got the promotion he was after, and he's been sitting on attack ever since. So there's a court case against him, claiming that he's been embezzling funds from a charity that he's involved in. And now we find out that the son thinks he is Daredevil. And this is a really great shot of Matt here. And you have a sense of, like, what is the emotion that is conveyed there? It's like he's interested, but he's also a little bit fearful of what that might mean. That the boy thinks he's Daredevil, identifies with Daredevil, when Daredevil has been basically handing out all kinds of beatings over the last few months in Miller's creative hands, let's say. Last few months in Marvel time, that is, but in Miller's creative run. So the father gets up, leaning on the table there. Liz, you said you talked to the boy, you said he'd be good. She apologizes. Bad enough, that boy cries till he's purple whenever we take his videotape away. Bad enough. How am I supposed to make a good impression of Murdoch here when my boy can't so much as pass the rolls without acting crazy? So the father really is, you know, the kind of origin of the dysfunction in this family, and the dysfunction in the boy, you'd have to say. And he just continues, you know, what would I say, like imposing his tough authority on the boy. Don't talk back to at your papa, boy, he says. Boy starts to protest. You'll sit and eat your food and you won't talk crazy. And then he backs down. There's Miller doing that technique again of showing the boy protesting there, but my stomach. Then he goes quiet and then silent. And he's dropped down to the bottom of the panel and shrunken in terms of the size. That's really good technique. Something for any budding artist to make a note of and have a go at using it in their own work, I would suggest. And now after dinner, after that lovely pleasant dinner, and you can just see all the time Murdoch is saying nothing. He's saying nothing, he's just observing. The father takes out his .38 caliber revolver. Wish you could see her, Murdoch. He's like caressing the gun. She's a beauty, regular peacemaker. And don't you worry, none, I got me a license for this baby. Yes, sir. He's like making love to the gun. My family's protected. So the gun is ostensibly for family protection, but we'll see what, in effect, he uses it for a little later in the issue. And then we're back in that hospital room with Daredevil and Bullseye, captive audience. And Daredevil says in his first-person narration, yeah, that Jurgens was a real treat. But it was his son, Chucky, who interested me. I had to understand the effect I had on him. So a few days later, I paid him a visit at his school. So Chucky's getting teased by the school children there about his identification with Daredevil. Daredevil shows up. He seemed to be a sweet enough kid, more in need of some honest fun than anything else. And me, I could have used a round or two of applause. This is really subtle from Miller. He's basically saying, you know, that Daredevil has a bit of an ego. And we've seen that in his run. He's identified that. And he's looking for a round of applause. So he takes Chucky bounding across the rooftops of Midtown Manhattan. Chucky's having a great time, doesn't want it to stop. Daredevil says, you're due back at school. Chucky, that's a really nice drawing. That must have been from some photo reference there. Some of these images are really true to life and could well be from photo reference. And then, as I said, some of the other ones, he looks like an adult dwarf. But in any case, I mean, I've been you sometimes, I am, but I never met you, and you're my hero. Yeah, you're excellent. So Daredevil's really pleased with that. And now a turn is taken. When somebody gets in your way, you give it to them. Pow. Nobody tells you what to do. You're free. And that gets a different expression on Daredevil's face. That takes him aback, because that's the whole question here. You know, superheroes solve problems. The trope is by violence, by fist fights. But what kind of impact is that having on young, perhaps impressionable readers like Chucky with family problems at home? So here in the present of the hospital room, we see that Daredevil is still in that really dark mood, and he's just after pulling the trigger once again. And this happens quickly. Pulls it at the side of his head, puts it up to Bullseye's head, pulls the trigger, nothing. That's 4 out of 6 Bullseye. We're both lucky so far. You know what Chucky said bothered me, but not as much as it should have? I should have gotten him professional help. Fact is, I was charmed, not to mention thrilled, to find myself admired. Yeah, metatextually, I'm thinking that Miller's reflecting on some of those letters he got in while he was working on this particular title. Those would be letters from kids, from children, admiring Daredevil, enjoying the violence of Miller's run, his take on Daredevil. And he's kind of like, I feel he's reflecting on that through the character of Daredevil Matt in this particular issue. So thrilled I didn't look too closely at what I was being admired for. And the last thing I should have done, the very last, was to encourage Chucky's fantasy. Then I found out when I went to question the plaintiff in the Jurgens case. Really great layouts on this page. This is the Miller speciality layout. Horizontal panels that take up the width of the page. Really effectively used here. Also, I want to note, like Lynn Varley's doing the colouring here. She's got a very particular palette that she draws on with this kind of almost, what is it? It's almost, it's like a blue-green in the background for the sky. It's typical of her palette, and I think we see it, we see it on the cover as well, maybe a little bit. I do think there's no credits for the cover, but my guess is that Lynn Varley's doing the cover coloring as well. In any case, let's continue with the story here. So Daredevil is going to have an interview with the plaintiff. That's this guy, Jutter. And as he's en route, who is in the bushes except for Chucky? And he says that he's Daredevil and he's on the prowl. He's still identifying with Daredevil. You see that Jutter guy has it in for a good guy. I'm going to clear him. So Chucky's got this very black and white view of morality, good versus evil. But Matt tells him, Chucky, you have to listen to me. You're not Daredevil. You can't help your dad. Chucky protests. Matt tells him to go home, and he pulls off his shirt and jacket to reveal his Daredevil costume beneath, because Judder is getting away, and Chucky tracks Judder on the back of his car there. Unfortunately, Chucky didn't need to switch. And now we're back in the present. Like, this is a great sequence of panels. There's something really, really unsettling and even more violent about this sequence of images, putting the barrel of the revolver right under his throat. Like, that bullet is going to go right through his brain. That is just, the implication of that is kind of horrifying. And also, it very much is a sequence of panels that we would see from Miller in the likes of Sin City in the future. Click, he pulls the trigger, that's 5. Lucky me. Like, the irony dripping from that statement. And then he points it at Bullseye. Guess this is it, Bullseye. But I'd better finish my story first. Judder rode to Central Park, where both Chucky and I ran into a bit of a surprise. And we're not going to get, like this, we're held in suspense until the very last page in terms of whether Daredevil is going to pull the trigger. And there's only one chamber left, so the bullet has to be in there. So he's, like, what we're looking at here is the question of, is Daredevil going to kill Bullseye? So we're picking up with the story again in Central Park. Interesting inking technique here. It looks like Terry Austin was using maybe some cotton wool or something to dab down ink in the background to suggest the vegetation in Central Park. Also, look at Daredevil there. He's like an animal crouched on the pavement there, listening in to the conversation between Jurgens and Judder. So that's who Judder was going to meet in the car. And Chucky, who's tailed along, now discovers that his father is not a good guy. So let's turn the page and see how this develops. Yeah, so we see Daredevil there. He's still got the gun pressed right between the eyes of Bullseye. Get it, Bullseye, you understand? Judder meets Jurgens, they talk, and it doesn't take a genius to figure out that in this case, nobody's clean except Chucky. So it looks like here that that Jurgens is blackmailing. He's blackmailing Judder. Judder is blackmailing Jurgens, else I'm following my accusations with these photostats. And Jurgens says to him, you won't. You'll just hand them right over, or I'll blow your brains out. So, I don't know, like, this is an interesting way to read what he said earlier, like family defense. Like, maybe it is a kind of family defense. Judder says, hey, you're joking. And Chucky makes himself known to his father. So his father there, taken by surprise. Chucky here, I like the silhouetting of some of his head and face there with the foliage from the bush. And then the father gets angry. I mean, like, we'd expect that. Given what we know of his character. You go on home, boy, he says. Do what your papa says and go on home. And now Daredevil makes himself known. What are you going to do, Jurgens? Shoot your own child? I'll shoot you, says Jurgens. But Daredevil grabs his hand and starts crushing it so the gun falls out. I was cocky, angry. I took my time with Jurgens, he says in the first person narration. And we get these silent panels. But we can see what's happening. He's crushing his hand, and then he knocks him out cold with just one punch of his right hand. And Chucky's just left there staring. And you see what I said? Like, it looks like Chucky looks like he's aged 3 decades from what he's witnessed in this particular panel. My third dumb move, says Daredevil. What a great page. What great storytelling. It's so good. It is characteristic of Miller in this period. He's so confident with his skills. He'll just scale back on the dialogue, scale back on the first person narration, and let the images do the talking. And it's so eloquent, a page like this. So Chucky is seen as hero punch out his own father. And he's going to have all kinds of Freudian psychopathology on account of seeing that. So then we're back in the hotel room, not the hotel room, the hospital room. Chucky was, in his own way, a devoted son. Daredevil says in his first person narration, his father may have been his only tether to reality. So the episode in the park did things to Chucky, bad things. I went to check in on him at home a week later. So Chucky's just glued to the Daredevil versus Bullseye video, and he's going over and over, perseverating on this conundrum. Papa's bad, or Daredevil wouldn't have hit him. And if Papa's bad, so am I. So Chucky is having a real post-traumatic psychiatric episode after seeing what happened in the park. And this video is not helping any on the videotape, as in the TV studio where it was filmed years ago. I won our fight, Bullseye. But in Chucky's mind, the battle raged on. Hank Jurgens' trial cost his family every cent they had. So I put up the money for Chucky's psychotherapy. Months passed, and with them the trauma, or so we thought. So Chucky's getting teased again, and what does he do? He pulls out a .38 caliber revolver. Lord only knows where he found the gun. Daredevil says in his first person narration, even for children, they're all too easy to come by, even though Chucky once again looks like he's about 40 years old in that particular shot. It was a .38 caliber revolver, just like his papa's. And here Lynn Varley is using Glynis Oliver's trick of having a red background for a moment of violence. So Chucky fires the gun, and it hits one of these bullies in the arm, which raises the question, when Chucky pulled the trigger, was he his father, or was he you, Bullseye, or was he me? So who was Chucky's role model? Who was Chucky's identificand, using the psychological terminology, correct terminology? The child Chucky shot survived, by the way. So did Chucky after a fashion. We won't really know how Chucky is until he starts talking again, and it doesn't look like he's going to be very well at all. So crazy violence in this particular issue. And now we're back in the hospital room. Daredevil still holding that revolver steady, pointing it right straight between Bullseye's eyes, and continuing in his first person narration. So I keep asking myself again and again, what made Chucky like he was? What am I giving people by running around in tights and punching crooks? What am I showing them? And remember what I said, metatextually, this is about us. What are we, the readers of this comic, seeing? What moral lessons are we learning from this? Especially when we're reading it at 10 years old, or 12, or something like that. Am I showing them that good wins out, that crime does not pay, that the cavalry is always on its way? Or am I showing them that any idiot with fists for brains can get his way if he's fast enough and strong enough and mean enough? Am I fighting violence or teaching it? Like, this is the nub, this is the core of this particular issue. It's great stuff for early 1980s comics. Or am I to blame at all? Maybe all the blame rests with creatures like you and Jurgens. Perhaps if Chucky had a father like mine. So, like, what is the origin of evil? Societal evil is now the question. The question is turning to that. Is it to do with education? Is it to do with family circumstances? So Daredevil turns to the thought of his father. There was a man, Bullseye. He made his son proud. If not for him, there never would have been a Daredevil. You see, the amplified senses, those I had for years before I became Daredevil, and the fighting skills, the acrobatics, they're just tools. But the man, he had to be inspired. As a boxer, battling Jack Murdoch was second rate, but as a father and as a man, he was one of the best. And when the time came to prove it, he was ready. So he tells the story, the familiar story of Matt's father being set up to lose this fight in Madison Square Gardens, and instead he decides to win the fight. And he's shot for it down a dark alleyway because the mobsters who had bet on him losing lost all their money. So he pays the price. And again, great layouts on these pages, that classic of this era, full horizontal panel layout, really good stuff. Nobody did it better back then than Frank Miller himself. He died and showed me what a man is, Bullseye. That's when I put on this costume and became my one-man war on crime. The shades of the way that Miller's going to write Bruce Wayne in Dark Knight Returns, in those particular lines. In all the years that have passed, I've held his image before me, shining, untarnished. Now what comes next is brilliant, absolute sheer brilliance. We get this silent panel here, no background, he pauses, and then Miller flips the angle on Daredevil. He looks the other way. I'm a liar, he says. My father was far from the best. Oh, he tried very, very hard, but he was far from the best. There's another story, another piece of my life buried deep, kept from even those I've held close. Long before he died, when I was just a boy, Dad made me promise to study, to make something of myself in a respectable profession. But which profession, of course? Mostly he made me promise never to fight. So afraid he was that I'd end up like him. It was tough keeping the promise, and just once, I failed. Now here is Miller, who's added so much to the Daredevil mythos over the last number of years, adding a final new piece to Daredevil's own origin story. He's really thought so carefully about this character over the course of the years that he's had creative control over him, and he's adding one additional piece here that will become embedded in the original Stan Lee origin story. I was Chucky's age when it happened, walking home from school. So young Matt runs into some school bullies. Again, look at this guy. He looks like he's 50 years old. Again, I lay the blame for that at Terry Austin's feet. It's the inker who's supposed to correct things and make sure that things look right in the finished printed work. So in any case, back into the story. Matt's expensive book that his father spent his last money on, a page is ripped out, and Matt basically flips out. He beats up the bullies and he runs home triumphantly to his dad. But when I got home, listen to this panel. When I got home, Dad was drunk. Wow, that's not the kind of thing you would have gotten in the Silver Age at all. Like, this is grim reality that Miller's inscribing into Daredevil's origin story here. So the father's drunk. What happened to you, Matt? The kids, you ought to see them, Dad. Matt is triumphant. Stimmy's got a shiner, and I think I broke Jocko's nose. So how's the father going to react? Turn the page. Look at the look on his face. Grabs his son. Work my fingers to the bone. Take jobs no self-respecting man would take. For you, for your future, and you go and fight like and Matt protests, Dad, you're hurting me. He says, I'll hurt you, all right. And then basically he slaps him with the back of his hand right in the mouth, draws blood as well. The brutality of it. So interesting that Varley didn't go for an all red background there. I wonder why. It's intriguing. I would have gone for all red, but it's a shocking moment, and the father is immediately repentant, begging for forgiveness there, saying he's sorry, but Matt runs off. And then this is a beautiful panel here. It evokes what we see on the cover. I spent the night perched on the Brooklyn Bridge. He must have ran a long way from Hell's Kitchen to get to there, thinking about right and wrong, and how even my father could do bad things, how even Dad needed rules to obey, laws. By morning, the course of my professional life was set. I would become an attorney. And there we have it. So a moment of paternal violence. And it really kind of makes us go back and think about the relationship between Hank and his son Chucky, and why Matt didn't say a thing at the dinner table about it. It's now revealed that there may have been something of that very atmosphere in his own childhood, boyhood, and why he felt the need to show Chucky like some fun, to get some fun into his life, instead of all the study and all the kind of guilt that his father laid on him in terms of this duty to make something of himself. That it wasn't a joyful thing, it was like something that he had to do, and if he didn't do it and didn't achieve it, he would feel so guilty for it, and his father, if he was drunk, would give him a crack across the jaw as well. So here we are at our violent climax to the issue, and I guess That's what it all comes down to, Bullseye. When I fight you and beat you and know deep in my heart that I'm right in what I do, when I hate you and you're kind so fiercely I could cry, when I can see that you are black and evil and have no right to live, when at last, at long last, I've got you set squarely in my sights and I smell your fear and it is sweet to smell when it comes to that one final fatal act of ending you. And look at the technique here where we're getting a zoom in on Bullseye's eye, and then we get this transition to the trigger pull, and it mirrors the eye, the shift. It's like a kind of a visual transition from the close-up on the eye to the trigger guard and the pull on the trigger. That's so well done. It's like it is using comics in a way that would otherwise just simply be possible with film, but Miller's so good at what you can do with comics now that this is in his toolkit, so to speak. It's so well done, so well done. And of course, we've got the red background now, and really that's telegraphing for us that we're going to have a moment of violence. Is this how Frank Miller is going to end his original run on Daredevil? Is Daredevil going to kill his enemy, kind of his arch enemy, Bullseye? Turn the page. We have to get past the editorials and the advertisement for the Dark Crystal. Last page. The hammer falls. My gun has no bullets. Guess we're stuck with each other, Bullseye. And that's it. No next issue, no letters page, nothing. That's where Frank Miller leaves us. Daredevil is a man of honor. He is also a character in a Comics Code Authority approved book. At the end of this reflection on all of the violence that Miller has explored in his run on Daredevil, he does not push it that one extra step. Daredevil will not kill Bullseye, not in cold blood. He's a hero after all, but the reader is left to ponder what it all means, because Frank Miller isn't going to explain it in a Stan Lee 1960s kind of end narrative caption. There isn't going to be the Watcher here like in Uncanny X-Men 137 to explain the morality of what we've witnessed. This is great comics. This is mature comics from it went on sale at the end of October 1982, and Miller's out the door from Marvel. He's gone across the street, so to speak, figuratively speaking, to DC Comics to pursue his creative vision with Ronin, and then later on, after the not commercial success of Ronin, Dark Knight Returns. So really, really great stuff. Miller's own declared favorite issue of his original Daredevil run, number 191. Let me know your thoughts on this in the comment section. I'm sure you've got some. And if you enjoyed my review and commentary, please like it on YouTube and share it. It really helps the channel. If you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more content like this.